he had built for them as a wedding present.
Oh, okay.
So when your father's a millionaire, life is pretty golden. Ned was working for his father, but I imagine his compensation was far more than what it would have been if he was working for someone else.
I was going to say, so he doesn't really have to do anything.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Ned and Lucy were society darlings and were often found in the local newspapers.
Oh.
They had a family yacht for their use. Mm-hmm. And Ned even bought Lucy a custom car from the Earl Automotive Works. And the newspapers called it, quote, the classiest creation of the year.
What kind of car was it?
They didn't say. I've never heard of Earl Automobile, so I don't.
Oh, I haven't either.
I was wondering maybe if they were a dealership.
Oh, probably.
Yeah, I don't know, but he had it specifically commissioned. It had a bright red leather interior and coach lamps created by the Tiffany Company of New York.
Oh my, that sounds like an impressive car.
I know, right?
Mm-hmm.
So all this excess did come with a price tag.
Mm-hmm. And
in November of 1921, Ned made a trip to New York City, accompanied by his faithful secretary, Hugh. Ned withdrew $100,000 from his personal bank account, and then they both boarded a train for Washington, D.C. Once there, they met with the Secretary of the Interior, Albert Fall, who happened to be a good friend of Ned's father. They had met many years before in the silver mines of New Mexico. Ned gave Albert Fall the $100,000 and then went back to Los Angeles. A couple weeks later, Ed Sr. deposited the $100,000 back into Ned's account.
Wait, he got it, he gave it to his dad, and his dad gave it back to him.
He got the money, he gave it to Albert Fall.
Oh.
And then Edward Sr. gave him the money back.
Okay.
So this strange transaction resulted in Edward receiving a contract to drill for oil on federal land in California.
Oh, okay.
All of these shenanigans would result in the
Teapot Dome.
Right, Teapot Dome scandal. So Ed Sr., Albert Fall, and many other government officials were implicated in this fraud plot. Now, Ed Sr. maintained that the money had been a loan to an old family friend. After all, it had been paid back a few weeks later, right? So the government, as it does, dragged its feet. Yeah, dragged its feet. Drug its feet.
When you say hanged instead of hung, do you say dragged instead of I don't know.
Well, the government's slow.
Sure.
We'll go with that. The government's slow, so everyone was charged with conspiracy in 1924, but it didn't go to trial until 1926. And Ed Sr. ended up being acquitted of the charges. So in the following year, in 1927, Ed Sr. would commission a colossal mansion to thank his son Ned for being such a good sport.
Okay. So said mansion, which is known either as Greystone or the Doheny Mansion, depending on which one you prefer, was designed by an architect called Gordon Kaufman. He was born in 1888, so about 30 years younger than Doheny, in Forest Hill, which is in London. So Kaufman graduated from London Polytechnic around 1908. He then moved to Canada and lived in Vancouver for 6 years. Decided to follow the sun and moved to California. He arrived in Fresno in 1914 and moved to LA the following year. Kaufman had a bunch of commercial and residential commissions, but you may know him best as the architect of the Hoover Dam. Well, not the engineering part, but the part that you go in anyway, with all the turbines and such.
That was a decade after this? Was it the 1930s?
Yeah, Right. So the Hoover Dam was begun in 1931.
Okay.
Yeah.
So actually not even a decade, just a few years.
Right. So he designed the exterior of the dam in the Art Deco style, which was what was popular at that time. And a different architect called Alan Tupper True, who I will not get into, designed the interior of this building. Another commission that same year or around the same time was the Los Angeles Times building, also designed in Art Deco, and that's downtown LA. Kaufman liked to combine different styles, and I guess it was kind of an eclectic time in architectural history because architects were borrowing heavily from multiple time periods and didn't necessarily stick to one particular aesthetic. The other sort of important part of the creation of Greystone Mansion was the landscape architect, whose name was Paul Thiene. I don't really know how to say his name. It's Thiene. He was born in Germany in 1880, and he received a technical degree in landscape architecture and completed an apprenticeship there as well. He moved to the U.S. in 1903 and actually worked with the Olmsted brothers in Massachusetts until 1910.
That's quite the pedigree.
Yeah, it really is. So he also got smart, followed the sun, realized he didn't need to stay in the freezing Northeast, and he moved to San Diego to work on the landscape design for the Panama, California exposition, actually with Frank Lloyd Wright's son, Lloyd Wright. These two men, so this is kind of a connection to Taliesin. These two men were business partners for a year, and they collaborated until 1918. So Thiene designed landscapes for major estates in Southern California while he was there. Construction of Greystone began February 15th of 1927, and it took 3 years to build. What else took at least 3 years to build? Glensheen. Greystone was completed in 1928 in Beverly Hills, and this 55-room Tudor Revival mansion covers over 46,000 square feet. There's a book that was written about Southern California master architects, specifically on Kaufman, and there was a brief, there's sort of informational guide about it, said that Greystone was English Gothic and Jacobean. A lot of other places said that it was Tudor revival, So it was kind of a combination, I suppose. If you look at it, I wouldn't say that it was Jacobean. I would say that it was more Tudor, but there's no half timbering. Right. The second story doesn't project. It seems more formal than that. So it's kind of a minimalist Tudor revival. And I guess it's kind of more English Gothic, but I'm not sure I would call it Jacobean. Anyway.
Semantics.
Right. 46,000 square feet. They keep getting bigger, I swear. So Glensheen was 39 rooms and 20-something thousand square feet, I think. So this was even bigger.
But the largest house in California is Hearst Castle.
Correct.
At 90,000 square feet.
That's insane.
So this house is...
second.
In the future, we'll probably end up doing Hearst Castle since it was commissioned by William Randolph Hearst, who basically pioneered scandal in the newspaper. So it would be...
And the architect was Julia Morgan, so very important female architect. In any event, it was the second largest house in California. And I mentioned that it was 55 rooms, and this is habitable rooms, not awkward closets and funky spaces. These are actually rooms that you can occupy. So it's a giant house. The entire estate originally covered 429 acres, of which there are about 18 acres left, including the house and the formal gardens. The entire estate, the landscape design, and the architecture cost $3.2 million to develop. And the part of that amount that was the house was $1.2 million. Now, I like to give credit where credit's due and understand that it's not all about the architect or the landscape architect. And you need a team of people to do these estates. The construction company, the general contractors were P.J. Walker Company of San Francisco. I thought it was important to mention because this would have been quite a commission. The architecture of the house, the style, is Tudor Revival, and it's not uncommon for the late 20s, but it's not really something that you would imagine in a lush Southern California landscape and the sunny climate. You mostly see Mediterranean Spanish Revival, the tile roofs and stucco and just things that are more light and bright and airy and tropical looking. So this is a fairly dour style for this location. So Tudor is an eclectic mixture of early and medieval English building traditions and it makes a picturesque appearance. So these kind of pared down versions of English-inspired styles, like at Glensheen with the Jacobean or Jacobean, right? The combination of Elizabethan and Jacobean. They're popular in the early 20th century, and you would see this kind of style across the country because it appeared in literature like pattern books and builder's guides and mail order catalogs. So you didn't have to be an oil tycoon to be able to afford the latest style trend. It's kind of an H&M kind of thing. Like you can look in this pattern book and buy something that's popular, but it's within your budget.
IKEA.
Yeah, exactly. So note that this, our third installment in the Architecture Scandal Sheets series, highlights another design that is a nod to a past style. So this time in American architectural history is known as eclectic because you have architects like Frank Lloyd Wright creating past-inspired but forward-thinking design, and architects like Kaufman and Johnston of Glensheen more looking at pattern books and history and designing revival. And while Kaufman later in life was adept at the more modern styles, like he did do more of the sort of throwback styles. This is kind of interesting. This revival movement began at the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, that's written about in The Devil in the White City, which is an excellent book if you haven't read it. And the historical interpretations of European styles were really encouraged. But what Greystone and the Tudor Revival have in common are very steeply pitched roofs, multiple gables, and decorative details, which you can see on Greystone inside with carved rafters, stone mantles, detailed carved wood staircase, and other elements like that. And outside you see it with very beautifully detailed chimneys, which were actually designed and carved by all different artists. There were 5 chimneys and 5 different people that created them. Anyway, like I said, it's more formal and different. It's kind of a modern take on a Tudor revival. So as far as the construction goes, what you can't see is the steel reinforced concrete, but they're clad with Indiana limestone. And this is the same stone that is the cladding for the Biltmore estate. And the very expansive roof is made of slate. It's a very formal house with kind of an English storybook vibe, or kind of an English Gothic story vibe. It's elegant, but it's somber, and it looks like what you might imagine a haunted house would look like. Or maybe just a house for someone with a lot of money and decent but not excellent taste, I would say. It just seems like it's a little bit out of place. So it's just interesting to me.
And it sits up on a big hill.
It does. It's very, if you look at the house, it looks like it's frowning. If that makes any sense. It looks very serious.
There's a resting bitch face.
It does. Absolutely, the house has a resting bitch face. All right, so outside, I mentioned the landscape architect Paul Thien. He used Gothic and neoclassical styles in his landscape architecture. And we always talk about the great German engineering, whether it's cars or whatnot, and Thien was no exception to that. He was an innovator in the use of water and gardens. So at Greystone, he actually created a cascading 80-foot waterfall. And this is kind of impressive, more impressive than anything else that was done to the site, because before its construction, Greystone was actually a ranch. So he had kind of a blank slate to work with, which was great for him. The grounds also are famous for a Renaissance-inspired cypress lane. So there's a stand of cypress trees along this pathway. The estate also includes stables, kennels, tennis courts. Well, I should say included. They're not all still there. There was a fire station, a gatehouse, swimming pool, and pavilion, greenhouse, lake, and brooks. According to Thien's head designer, Emil Kuhl, the sky, quote, "The sky was the limit. I would ask Mr. Thien what the client might want. Give them everything," was the reply. And everyone loves a client with no budget.
Right.
So moving inside, The interior of Greystone is richly detailed, but not brightly lit.